Alright, this build is criminal, because if you like ignitions as much as I do, you're gonna love this build. I mean, just look at this. This is not okay. Today I'm revisiting my previous Infinite Ignition build, and yes, I know we were literally just here, but I had a feeling I could improve it even more. And I was right. I was so right. With this new version, I think I've created the strongest and most outrageous ignition build to date. No connection manipulation, no awkward setup, just straight ignitions with almost permanent radiant and restoration. A near 35% weapon damage boost the entire time the build is running when everything is stacked and rolling. Then once the artifact kicks in, the ignitions start going off. But the great thing about this is the setup can pretty much work for every single class. So if you're a hunter or a warlock main, you can use this too, and I'll give you some suggestions at the end. But today's build is a Titan build, because it has been so much fun to run this in every piece of content in the entire game, and just completely obliterate everything. So let's get into it. Now I'm saying this at the start, but you don't need any raid weapons, and you don't need any raid armor. You can create this build as soon as you unlock Solar. In most of the footage, I'm using Vex, because the recent buffs it received makes it feel disgusting. But the only requirement is just a solar weapon, ideally a solar primary, but any good solar weapon will work with this build. Focus on auto rifles or SMGs, just because they're fast firing weapons with a decent magazine size, because you'll want rapid fire weapons that you can just spray. So right out the gate, as I said, this is a Titan build, and the reason is simple, we want throwing hammers. This gives us the easiest and most consistent access to Radiant when running Ember of Torches. Hit something with your powered melee and boom, you're Radiant. Then you can pick up your hammer and keep going. No kill required, making it good for encounters with tanky bosses. And our exotic for this build is Path of the Burning Steps. An exotic that had a sneaky little secret I wish I knew about sooner. See, with each stack of Roaring Flames, Path of the Burning Steps increases our solar weapon damage and our ignition damage. I didn't know this till the other day, but it's absolutely insane for this build because of how many ignitions we'll be triggering. Now, as for our aspects, if we're running Path of the Burning Steps, we've got to run Roaring Flames, as I said. This will buff our solar ability damage if we need to rely on hammers. Then, we'll pair everything with Sol Invictus to give us sunspots. Solar ability kills and defeating Scorch targets will give us sunspots, and stepping into a sunspot will give us restoration, giving us the survivability we need for harder content. So whenever we get a kill with our throwing hammer to start the Radiant chain, we'll also get restoration rolling as well. We can have a healing grenade on standby if needed, but sunspots should be the primary way we get restoration. But to keep restoration going, we'll be running the fragment Ember of Empyrean. Any solar kill will extend both restoration and Radiant, making the build feel really smooth. Pair this with Ember of Solace to make restoration and Radiant last longer, and the build will feel really forgiving even if the ads spread themselves out. The final fragment is Ember of Eruption, because if we're gonna have ignitions going off left and right, we might as well make them as big as possible. Now you might be used to running Ember of Char or Ember of Ashes with a build like this, and I'm telling you right now, don't use them. We don't want to spread Scorch to enemies, and it'll make sense why in a bit. But first, I want to talk about the armor sets. There aren't any set bonuses that you have to run for this build. But the 2-piece and the 4-piece set bonus for Lustrous works really well with this build, especially because of that extra healing. Alternatively, the 4-piece set bonus for Shattered Throne, now that it's patched, is also pretty strong, giving you a 15% damage resistance at the high end of the perk. But as I said, there's no armor set that you have to run with the build, so it's just down to personal preference. You could also say that the 7th Seraph set would work with the build, but after seeing this in action, do you really think that we need to add that extra explosion? So at this point in the build, you're probably asking, well, how are we getting so many ignitions here? And that's all thanks to the artifact, specifically Kindling Trigger from the Queen's Foil Sensor. What this mod does at base is apply 30 stacks of Scorch to any unscorched target when dealing solar weapon damage, and this is without Ember of Ashes. But that's not enough to trigger an ignition, so we need to stack it by using the artifact perk bug. But we only need to use 4 kindling triggers, so that leaves the rest of the artifact open to run whatever we want. Something I strongly recommend is adding Fever and Chill from tier 1. because if you ever get into a situation where you don't have your hammer or you can't get close enough to use your hammer, then this will be an easy backup to get radiant and start ignitions. But I would still prioritize using a hammer to get radiant and sunspots for restoration to start the gameplay loop. Now hunters and warlocks, you've got a couple of options yourself. Hunters, I personally like Caliban's hand with this build, because getting a kill with an ignition will instantly refund your melee, regardless of whether it's the knife that triggered the ignition or not, allowing you to keep the whole build going really easily. Pair this with Acrobat's dodge for an extra source of radiant and you'll never have downtime on ignitions. Arguably, you've got a better suite of supers compared to Titans. As well as with Golden Gun, you've now got the recently buffed Blade Barrage, which is doing a decent amount of damage super-wise. I honestly had a good amount of fun playing around on Hunter, just throwing random throwing knives all over the place, though the downside is that you can kill yourselves from proxy knives, so just be careful, you know. Warlocks, Dawn Chorus is easily the best option. Just like Caliban's hand, with each ignition you get a big chunk of melee energy back, which makes it really easy to keep the build going. You've also got access to Touch of Flame, which allows your healing grenade to provide restoration times 2, which is a much stronger healing option compared to restoration times 1. So it's definitely worth considering. As a side note though, when running this build, if you're running Dawn Chorus, it will give you melee energy on other subclasses too. So give it a try and see what kind of weird builds you can come up with. I almost managed to get a Devour build working better than the actual Solar subclass, which I thought was just hilarious. Another option for Warlocks, if you want to run a different exotic, especially if you have Vex, is Rain of Fire. I would typically consider this exotic to be a PvP exotic or pairing it specifically with Air Dodge, but I always forget that this exotic makes you radiant whenever you get a fusion rifle kill, meaning you don't even have to mess around and get within melee distance for this build to work. You can just sit back at a safe distance and slay out. So I hope you end up giving this build a try for yourself. Let me know what you come up with if you decide to mess around with Dawn Chorus, and I will see you in the next one. I'm going to let my favorite clip just run to the end of the video, so as always, have a wonderful rest of your day.